Welcome to our Facebook Live Q&A. Today's subject is all about how to cope with uncertainty, particularly around schools returning. I'm Daisy Cresswell, founder of Make Good Trouble. We are a social enterprise and media production company, and our aim is to help adolescents and families improve their mental health and emotional well-being. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them. I am delighted to be joined by the amazing Kit Messenger, who I have proud to say I've worked with before. Kit, you're an education consultant and a former primary school head teacher and co-founder of Changing Chances. Kit, can you give us just a really quick summary of what Changing Chances does? I know you work a lot with parents.
We do. We work with parents. We work with police. We work with schools. We work with anyone who supports young people, trying to help them to understand about young people's brains, everyone's brains actually, and helping people to be at their best, really. So helping them if they've got any difficulties, if they struggle in any way. And it could be struggling academically, it could be struggling socially. So any kind of struggle, we help adults know this is the best way that you can help your young person.
Wonderful, thank you. So we've had some really lively discussions on our Facebook group over the last month, and in particular over the last 24 hours, actually, with the breaking news about more restrictions on our movement. And there's so much about schools returning and the complex issues around that, whether that's use of face masks, social bubbles, and people's safety around COVID and spreading of COVID. But the uncertainty is causing so much worry. And how can we help parents and carers focus on the things that they can control rather than energy that's kind of outside of their control? What's going on in our brains, Kit?
I think the first thing is there's something about normalizing and saying, do you know, it's really normal to feel a bit wobbly and a bit prickly when you don't know what's going to be happening, because it's a real human need. It's an emotional need that we all have to have some certainty in our lives. Everybody's got it. Adults have got that need to feel certain. Young people have got that need to feel certain. So I think the first thing is to normalize it. And then we've got to help young people to not put all of their focus on that, and to actually look at, I was working with a young person recently, helping them to say, actually, let's have a look at what you can't control. So we wrote everything down, all of their concerns. So put all of the concerns down. I'm a real believer in recording stuff, you know, getting someone, and I don't think it's very helpful sometimes for the young person to do the scribing, because sometimes that's the last thing they want. Sometimes it's really good for an adult just to scribble it on a post-it. Make it informal, don't make it too serious, and put those post-its down and say, okay, the stuff you can't control, whether Boris Johnson's going to say, right, that's it, no one can go out, whether you're going back to school, whether you've got to wear masks, all of those things that you really can't do anything about because it's someone else making those decisions, push them to the side. We're going to look at those in a minute, and we're going to say, what could you do when those thoughts come into your head? What can you do? What can you do with those? And then focus on what you can control. Well, what you can control is yourself. You can control how you respond to other people, what you decide to do every day to make yourself feel good, you know, how you fill your day with things that actually you enjoy, music. I love dogs, dog walking.
That's not looking at too much social media, even though we're on social media at the moment.
Yeah, do you know, it's funny, isn't it? Because I know that if I spend too much time on Twitter watching, looking at people's posts where they're arguing about stuff and not feeling great about stuff, I come away not feeling so great. So it's about saying, how can I feel connected with the world, but not to the extent that actually does me a disservice? So what can I control? I can control how much time I spend on social media. I can control how much time I go, no, I am going to go out and give myself a routine. I mean, at the beginning of lockdown, I started Couch to 5K. Well, people would have been quite surprised by that before. But I was like, no, actually, I can control that. I can control how fit I feel, how much I get into the open air. We know that those feel-good chemicals of oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, they're very much released when we're in green spaces. We know that. So making an effort, even if you live in urbanized places, making an effort. I mean, if you're in Brighton and Hove, there might not be green spaces right on your doorstep, but there's certainly a big, vast expanse of sea. And that that feeling of, it gives us perspective, doesn't it? When we look up at the sky, when we look out into a field, when we see the birds flying around, when we look out into the sea, it gives us perspective in our lives and say, oh, actually, there's a bigger thing out there than having to wear a mask. So I think that's a really great thing for people. And we know it does release those feel-good chemicals.
And is it that, am I right in thinking that it's about, I remember once you talking about we're hardwired to look for threat. And
we are. And that's, all of our brain is designed to do that. Our brain is designed to keep us alive. So it's always there going, is everything all right? Am I at the right temperature? Is everything going well? You know, and so it does it in terms of your physical well-being, but it also does it in terms of any other threat. And unfortunately, there's some elements of our brain that haven't evolved enormously from a long time ago. And sometimes we have a bit of a faulty sense of threat. We can sense threat when there's no threat, or when we can kind of make threats seem bigger in our own heads. So, you know, someone walks, sometimes we don't necessarily look at evidence, we interpret. That's the great thing about our prefrontal cortex and the fact that we've got a cerebral cortex, is that we can think. So, but the disadvantage of that,
we can overthink,
alongside all that survival threat, is sometimes we think about things that aren't really based on evidence. So we walk down the street and someone doesn't acknowledge us and we're like, oh my God, they're cross with us, oh my gosh, we go, oh. And actually they just didn't see us, or they're preoccupied with other things in their head. So sometimes we can start interpreting things and see threat where there's no threat. So there's something about looking at evidence, and then going back to that, what can we control? There's so much we can influence. We can influence how other people feel around us. We can influence how our parents feel, whether they're scared, you know, terrified all the time because we're out doing stuff, or whether they feel okay because we're checking in with them a lot. You know, not necessarily, you know, some negotiation going on. So
I mean, certainly with my daughters, one of my worries has been with me, I'm trying to restrict how much I look at the news, because that makes my brain go mad, and I worry, then over worry about, as you say, things I can't control. But with my teenagers, one of the things for me is what they're seeing on things like TikTok, and trying to sort of encourage them to maybe not look at too much of that. But I know that,
Daisy, there's something about that which is about, we've got to help our young people become much more body aware, so that they recognize, they start feeling when the stress chemicals, that cortisol, is raising in their system. So saying things like, when do you feel a bit prickly? When do you feel a bit stressed? When do you feel not quite right? When do you feel a bit anxious? Oh,
you say that.
Can you hear me again now? Oh, I seem to be connected. That's annoying. Hello.
Hi, it's Taylor here. I think Daisy's frozen.
Oh, is it Daisy who's frozen? Can you still see me? Hopefully you can hear me. Do you know what I'll do then? Is I'll just mention that bit about the fact that that the more we can be aware, body aware, and go, oh, actually, that's when I feel anxious. That's when I feel really great. Oh, I feel really great then. I feel more anxious then. We can start preparing ahead of time. So instead of letting life happen to us, we can be much more proactive about saying, actually, when I feel good, it's when I get up in the morning and I eat something straight away, or all of these different things. So for me, I know I feel much better if the last thing I do in the evening is reading, or something which isn't on my laptop. I don't always do that, and I think we mustn't be surprised when young people then don't keep to the program of that, even though they know it's not the right, the best thing for them.
Yeah, no, I find that really difficult.
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? And we've got to acknowledge that, instead of going, oh, you always done that again. It's really hard when you might get a bit of FOMO and worry that other people are, having a great time on social media and you're not part of it. It's really hard when you feel out of it. What would you like to have happen now, when you know that you get a bit anxious when you're on social media loads, and when you feel that you might be missing out? What could happen to help you to feel really good, and get young people doing the problem solving? They need to feel that we're on their side really on that. So sorry, Daisy, we lost you, didn't we?
Oh, thank you, Tay. Thank goodness. I was like, oh my God, it just completely, my internet just completely went down. Oh,
nightmare. I haven't even done my hair. But anyway, I'll leave you to it.
Thank you so much. Okay, has Taylor asked you the question yet, Kit?
She hasn't. I just saw that about how can you influence teenagers to want to go outside. There's something about one of the stress responses. We can go into a stress response when we're uncertain, when we don't feel in control of what's happening in life, or when we don't feel capable because we haven't been at school for 6 months and we're not really sure about whether we're going to be able to do really well, or when we don't feel a sense of belonging because we've been inside for so long. When all of those emotional needs are not met, some young people can go into what I call flop. So they might go into a kind of mobilizing stress response, like fight or flight, you probably heard of, fight and flight, but they might go into flop. And that's where they literally just spend. I've got a really good picture for flop, but you probably won't be able to see it on your screen.
I used to imagine my teenager like that.
Yeah. We can share it afterwards, these different stress responses. And this is the other thing. We've got to help young people to recognise their own stress responses, because we're not with them 24/7. Let's stop rescuing our teenagers and say, look, we're going to help you understand yourself better and go, oh yeah, I've gone into flop. And then we've got to make it worth their while to go outside. So instead of going, you need to get out more, you need to get out more. So not only are they in flop, but they feel that they're not. Yeah. Then they don't feel that actually anyone's really understanding them either. So do you know what? It must be so we've got to connect first. We've got to try and help to see what's happening for them. How do they feel? What is that? Try and get into their skin. It must be really hard for you when actually life isn't the same outside. You probably don't really want to feel like going out. I'm wondering, is there anything that would be worth your while going out for? And actually sometimes going, look, how about we go out and we get a takeaway and we sit on the beach? Yeah. Let's sit on the beach. Yeah. And I actually, sometimes children parents, when they get anxious, they get more controlling. This happens a lot. Doesn't always happen, but it happens a lot. What parents can do is sometimes parents can just feel so helpless that they just go, and they go into whatever, I just don't know what to do. And it's really normal that it happens. It's a stress response. Or they might get really controlling. Neither of those two things work. What we've got to do is connect with our teenager by going, how is it for you? What's going on for you? What's life like for you at the moment? And try and understand from their perspective. And then say, okay, what could be a little bit better for you? And trying to look at what works for them, really. So things like going outside, not just going, you need to go for a walk, but saying, if there was going to be any outside trip that was going to be worth your while to actually get out of bed for, what might that be?
I mean, one thing I remember you talking to me about way back when I was having real big problems with one of my daughters, was you talked to me about listening to understand, not listening to fix.
Yeah.
And the day I changed from trying to, so every time she spoke, I sort of interjected and said, what about if we do that? And how about if we do that? And what about if we do that? Didn't work at all. It just made her more anxious, I think.
Yeah.
But when I started to listen to understand, so all I did was listen, actually, and sort of, you said to confirm some of the words back to her of what she said. The only thing that, and it works because they start to work it through in their head. They come away feeling a lot better. But I did sit there with all of this stuff in my head, and I then didn't know what to do with it. And I remember somebody else calling that a dump and run, which I thought was hilarious. How do we?
I call it pass the poo.
Ah, right. Okay. Well, similar thing. Yeah, exactly.
Same
how
thing.
How do we as parents cope when we have been given so much information, and how do we then process that so that we don't worry as much as we might be?
Do you know, I think part of it is using circles of control. What can you control? What you can't you control? You can't control a teenager. They're a teenager. And so that's part of it. Sometimes people are absolutely shattered because they're trying to deal with their own lives, work lives, being on Zoom. We've got at the moment people who expect to be superhuman. They expect to be a parent. They expect to be going to work, but in Zoom in their own homes. So that's really hard. So I think part of it is about going, what can I control? What can't I control? I think part of it is planning. I call it prep for best. Plan things. You've got to plan ways in which you reduce your own cortisol as an adult. If you just let that dump on you, that's going to raise your cortisol up naturally. Of course it will, because you love your child and you're worried about them. So you've got, in order to be able to help your child and have the resilience to help your child, you've got to plan things. And actually it's really interesting, because I was working with a parent recently, and I'd only just started working with her, and it was really tough for her. It's really tough for her. And the first thing we did is said, right, for you to be at your best for supporting your child, you've got to decrease your cortisol levels, increase those feel-good chemicals, and we planned that first. And she looked at each day and said, how could she plan it in? And sometimes that's very hard because people are so busy, but it's about, you just go, I have to make that my priority. And it was interesting because in the end, she arranged some childcare. She went away for a weekend, so that, and then a month later, so that she could get that stress down. Because otherwise, if those cortisol levels raise, and you don't drain any of it out, it becomes red stress. And red stress is when you're on constant high alert. That's what happens to children as well. So actually what we learn there is we can do the same thing for ourselves as we can for our teenagers, where we say, what I'm seeing is that your cortisol levels have risen so much. That must be so tough for you. You must be like this, all jiggly all the time. Let's work together to help you reduce your cortisol levels and increase what I call feel-good chemicals. I call it the oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine. Help them to feel capable, to feel connected to the world and to other people, and to feel that they've got some control over their lives. And so I call it yellow feel-good chemicals.
I'm loving that.
And then you start seeing the world with a more positive lens. Sunny
You
do, because actually what happens is, if you keep looking at social media all the time,
and the news,
and your cortisol levels go up, and you listen to the news, and then you don't go out, what happens is life starts to feel a little bit blue. And then that goes up and up and up. I know those don't suit me. Up and up and up and up and up, up and up and up. And in the end, you're looking at the world with red lenses on. That's red stress.
I'd like to just get some of those and walk around the house with them. The girls, they won't approach me when I've got the red lenses on.
Well, do you know, that's something you can start saying. Where is your stress? There's a practical thing. Do you feel at the moment? Have you woken up? Do you know, it's about saying what works for you to your teenagers. Is it very annoying for you when I start on your back, or wanting to engage with you when you first get up? Or what do you need? What do you need to feel yellow in the morning? So just starting to use that language. What do you need to feel yellow? When do you feel a bit blue? When does it get to red stress? What could you do to reduce it? Just having that language together. Don't fix it for them. And there was I think this is important, but there was a parent the other day, she said, oh, my child was saying that she's really scared. She's so anxious about going back to school. She doesn't know. She was really, and the parent, you could tell the parent was in red stress about it. And the child was in red stress about it. And she said, so I've told her, don't worry, it's all going to be okay. The teachers are going to be lovely to you and you're going to see all your friends. Blah, blah. And I said, do you know, you did that with all the best intentions. But what it was doing is saying, all of the concerns you've got, I'm just going to brush them under the carpet, cover them up and go, oh, it's going to be fine. Silver lining everything. And that actually ends up with a child feeling like you haven't understood them. They don't feel understood. Feeling understood is such an important need for everybody. That's why parents get frustrated when they don't feel understood by their teenager. So that's why trying to both feel understood, understand them, you try and understand them. The more you do that, the more I'm trying to understand you as well. So that shared language can be very helpful.
One of the things that I mean, this is actually a bit of an age-old problem, but it seems to have really been highlighted with the lockdown is, and there was some stuff in the press about it, is kids going back to school with what they're calling their fingers and thumbs haven't stopped twitching. I mean, they've just got so addicted to their devices, which we've heard about before, but it seems to be ever more present. And they're saying that some of the schools have had to take these kids out for runs and other forms of physical exercise to sort of calm the compulsions But what experience do you have of kids who might find it challenging in a classroom environment? And what can we do with as parents to help there, do you think?
Do you know, there's lots of, there's several different issues there. There's first the issue of screens. And we know that most screen time, the frames per minute and the light is very different to frames per second, and light is very different to frames per second in normal life and light, natural light. So it actually, I believe that in itself raises cortisol levels. It depends what you're watching. If you're watching Fred Rogers from 1950 something.
Oh, we loved Fred Rogers.
Love Fred Rogers. Do you know, actually, it's interesting that Fred Rogers, they did some analysis of his programs, and the frames per second were just right for the human brain to feel calm.
Wow, if anybody doesn't know who Fred Rogers is, he was an amazing maverick in the sort of 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Children's television.
He did the most wonderful thing. He did the most wonderful thing when there was still segregation, which I find unbelievable at that point. He invited a black police officer to sit with him with both of their feet in the paddling pool.
I remember that.
Oh, love that.
I remember
man.
it.
I love that.
I saw the documentary about it.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Anyway, so we know that actually, of course, children are going to be like this a bit. If they've been inside, it's a bit. Just think of a coiled wire. You cool one, off it goes. And they're used to a different light, a different frames per second. And so normal life is a bit boring. Normal life is boring. I discovered this many, many years ago, and I took some children, and they were much, much younger. They weren't teenagers, to this farm, and they were looked after children. They'd spent a lot of time on screens, and I was super excited by this farm. I was like, oh my gosh, there's piglets, there's chicks. They couldn't give two hoots about the animals, because for them it was all a bit boring. And they were just like, oh, is there a games machine here? And I was like, are you crazy? We're in a farm. But I had to try and understand from their point of view that it did seem a bit slow. Even little piglets running around felt a bit slow. So I think it's about, what can we do? We can work with our child to help them understand. That doesn't always work, because sometimes the impulse to be on social media with all the rewards it gets back, as well as the cortisol levels, is actually quite big. But what we can do is find ways in which they feel good going outside. It goes back to that thing I was saying before. We have to help young people to find their calm. For some people it's swimming. For some people it's music. For some people it's, for my mum it's knitting. Oh, it's not knitting actually. Jigsaw puzzles. Everybody's got their own calm. Same for young people.
I think one of the issues is if we think that their calm is the screen.
Because they can't. Yeah. And the thing is, they think their calm is the screen. Unless we help them to explore that and go, look, I can really understand why you feel that, because actually you feel in your comfort zone. I'm wondering if your comfort zone is a bit different to absolute release of calm. I'm wondering. So we have to do a lot of wondering with our teenagers so they don't feel controlled. That's really important. And then we have to help them feel. I mean, I'm delighted to hear that children are being taken out in school and running about, because some children have higher proprioceptive needs. That's the need you've got. So proprioception is not very well known, even amongst in schools, actually. In some schools it is, in others it's not. But it's the feedback you need on your body and bones to feel grounded and to feel calm. And some people have got a much higher proprioceptive need. I have. And it's interesting, whenever, and it took me until I was in my late 30s, early 40s, to discover that when I put a really heavy blanket on my lap, I focus better when I'm on my laptop.
Wow. Does that relate to things like ADHD and stuff like that? Or is
it does, yeah. So if you look at neurodiverse profiles like ADHD, and even with dyslexia, dyscalculia, they can have higher proprioceptive needs. Parents might have heard of it as sensory processing disorder. They might have heard of that. Or they might have sensory sensitivity. But that proprioceptive, where you actually physically need. Now, I know that when I don't get enough movement and feedback on my body and bones, I actually feel a bit itchy, scratchy. So what do? It's really good for me to go for a good brisk walk or a run, or get a bit of movement before I have to go into a meeting. Okay, now let's transfer that to young people. If they're going to go into school and they haven't had any movement, they go from a car to a classroom, they're going to go nuts, because they need a lot more movement.
Yeah, because I mean, some of our members on our Facebook group, they've brought up the whole thing about ADHD. I mean, we've got ADHD in our family, and how and the kids being able to focus in school. I mean, schools always it was always been a problem with that in my experience, because schools are sit down, beat and crack on, and if you are physically unable to keep still. But
do you know, it's so funny, Daisy, because when I was ahead, I remember sitting in lessons and thinking, you know, when I was observing other staff and monitoring, etc., etc., I remember thinking, oh crumbs, I can't sit here for any longer. I'm gonna have to get up. And of course, because I was the head, I could get up and move about. And I remember that was always my feedback back to staff, saying, because I used to sit with the young people, and I'd say, do you know, I'm a 40-year-old woman. I found it hard to sit still. Oh my gosh, imagine if you're also, because we know that young people have higher proprioceptive needs anyway. And so actually so part of it is this. Let's go back to circles of control. Young people cannot control every teacher in their school. If they try to do that, you end up this, don't you? Young people can't control whole school systems. I'm on a mission to make sure we start looking at some experiences in school, make them better suited for people with neurodiverse profiles like ADHD, because actually most classrooms, or many classrooms, I don't want to generalize because there's some amazing schools and I know amazing heads and I know amazing teachers, but there are many classrooms where it's just not suited, the curriculum's not suited to someone with ADHD. If we teach our young people and we teach our children to understand their own needs and to start preparing ahead of time. I know I'm going to have 3 lessons in the morning which are going to be so hard to sit still for. What can I do? What can I do to prepare ahead? What can I be when I feel really itchy, scratchy out? What can I do that's going to be okay for other people? And you know, you can. There's a load of proprioceptive activities you can do at a table like that, where you don't really disturb anyone else.
And do you think that it's good? I mean, I can't presume anything, but you know, you'd think that the parents can approach the school and make sure that they are well aware of that, so that if the kid is doing that, they don't get penalised for it.
And you know, even better, because we don't want to. What happens a lot is parent goes in, my child. What we need to do is work with our children and say, let's go and speak to the school together. Let's problem solve this together. What would be better for you in a lesson? Oh, what would be better for me in a lesson would be if I could just stand up, do a stretch, walk to the back and come back every 5 minutes. Okay, what we'll do is we'll go and negotiate that with the school and we'll see what can happen. So the child feels part of it, in control of it. It's really, really important that with every step of that, because what we do is we help our young people become self-advocates. Otherwise, we're making them dependent on us. And then when we're busy at work and then everything's going, you know, pear-shaped, they've not got a voice to go, actually, this is what's happening for me. We've got to help our young people to become self-advocates. And it's by understanding their own needs. You know, I need to move around a lot. Do you know, one of the things that really frustrates me sometimes, and I'm working with lots of schools and lots of other agencies, is that if you look at the 2010 Equality Act, and you look at the kind of adjustments you would get in a workplace, of course you'd be able to get up and move around every 10 minutes if you've got higher proprioceptive needs in an office. It would just, it would be an adjustment that would be really reasonable within the Equality Act. So we've got to teach and educate everybody about young people's needs and our own needs.
I've just got one question that I'd like to ask you from somebody. They said that their 10-year-old son takes advice and comments from us at home or teachers as criticism and gets upset and stressed. How can we turn that around?
Right, the fact that it's about advice is what often happens is we're very quick to go, well, if you did this. What we've got to do, it goes back to that thing, listen to understand first. Okay, so when you're like this and you're throwing stuff around the classroom, what's going on for you? Let's really, really unpick that. How could you get that in a more helpful way? The best thing we can do is we help children come up with the ideas first. And then when they say things like, never go to school again, we go, okay, yeah, that will get rid of that problem. We accept it. And then we go, the only thing is that won't work for me. So we go back to that. What's going to work for me, for you, for everyone?
More of like a negotiation rather than...
Get children, so my big advice to that is get children to do problem solving with you. Don't, quite often we don't want to be, as an adult, my partner goes, wow, if you did this, if you did that, well, what you need to do is this. We then feel a bit told off, even if that's not the intention of the parent. And I think the other thing is that when young people have had a lot of real criticism over the years, or they felt like they're naughty or bad or not good enough,
labelled,
the minute a parent starts, even when they're not being like that, the child straight away is like, oh, not. We've got to go. So let's start by saying, I know sometimes the minute we talk about this, it's really horrible for you. You think I'm going to attack you. I can really understand that. That must be so hard. I'd really like to work with you. So acknowledge so much of this. Acknowledge what might be happening for them, and go, I notice every time I bring something up, it's hard for you. You get a bit prickly. I'm wondering if that's because you feel I'm not on your side. I wonder if that's because you feel that. Yeah, so we've got to do that first. You cannot do problem solving before you connect with your child and before they feel you are right on their side. Yeah.
So if we were to sum it up, then it's kind of listen and
listen, connect, get them to do the problem solving, and let them problem solve how to get a load of good feel-good chemicals like oxytocin. I know you probably can't see that. It probably looks like a urine sample, but it's my yellow lenses. How can they plan to feel good? Prep for best. Get them to plan ahead, and acknowledge when they feel bad, when they feel a bit blue, when they've got too much of that cortisol, and help them plan how to reduce that cortisol level.
And also,
let's stop being fixers.
For adults, the timing, because the time that I used to try and problem solve with my children was exactly the time I shouldn't have done it, which was at night, because we were all knackered. So we didn't have a fight. So I've stopped doing that. I do it in the car now. It's a bit easier if you're sitting parallel to someone. You can...
I would say, and I'd say make it. I always say busy. What do I always? My little things where you got to have hands busy, brain free.
Oh, that's
so, yeah. When you're in the car, they might be, so I always think help them to feel as if, so if they're doing stuff like when you're cooking, when they're doing, when you're busy, your hands are busy, but your brain's free. So don't be doing something which is on, on the phone, because your brain's not free then. So yeah, hands free. And then also don't make it too serious. Make it lighthearted. Who wants to sit down for an intense chat? If my mum, I'm nearly 50. If my mum said, well, let's have a very serious chat, I'll be like, oh no, thanks. I think I'll have exactly. Coffee instead. So let's make it lighthearted. Be on their side.
Brilliant. That's amazing, Kit. Well, there's so much there. What we will do is if there's anybody that's got anything extra they want, we'll send you any more questions we've got. But also we will put some stuff up on our help pages on our website, which is makegoodtrouble.co.uk. So if anybody needs anything there. And I've just left to say thank you, Kit, because I have to say, as a parent, I have used your techniques in the past, and it has absolutely changed my relationship with my daughter. It's made me really think about how I say what I need to say and change the whole way I've done it. So,
and do you know, one of the things I would finish with is to say it takes a lot of practice, because we are our neural networks for saying, well, what you need to do is this, are very, very strong. We've been practicing that for a long time. So I always say to parents, don't beat yourself up when you don't manage it. Yeah. Because it's really normal that it takes such a lot of practice to be able to listen, to understand, to be able to connect, to not jump and go, well, if you did that, it takes a lot of practice. But in the end, if you keep doing it, it will work. You'll have a much better relationship, and that will enable you to be a much better supporter for your child if you've got a really good connection with them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kit.
Thank you. Really nice to see you.
I'm sure you'll be on again.
Take care now.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.